Well, Vladimir Putin is calling Ukraine's bluff by saying they have been willing to go to peace talks all along. And in fact, the evidence supports that. We've been covering that for 2.5 years. We are tired of saying that Russia is willing to cease fire. Ukraine is doing political theater and refusing, and people are dying all along. Now, we reported in June that Zelensky, because he was so threatened by the war in Israel, decided to host a peace summit in Switzerland, saying we're going to come up with a peace idea to stop the war with Russia, but Russia was never invited. So that's not how you negotiate with somebody, by having them not come. That would kind of be negotiation 101, you would think. But they invited President Biden, and President Biden, also tiring of this war, realizing it does not help his popularity, didn't go to the peace summit in June in Switzerland. Instead, he went to the fundraiser with George Clooney and Julia Roberts. In hindsight, that was a bad idea because George Clooney... Right. Yeah. This was the headline, like, no, I'm busy. I got A-list celebrities. George Clooney turned around and turned turncoat on him. So maybe he should have gone to the BSP summit in Switzerland. In that same summit, China also said they were not going to go. They said that they would not participate in any peace deals unless 3 important elements were met, namely the recognition of the events by both Moscow and Kiev. So if Russia is not invited, we're not going to go because we're not going to come up with a unilateral idea. What is the point? India, same story, also RSVP'd no for exactly the same reasons. So now Zelensky is saying, okay, I'm going to have a new peace summit, guys. You're going to come to this. It's later in November. We are going to negotiate peace, and this time we will invite Russia. Now, this is the first time Zelensky has said that he would involve Russia in any decisions. You recall that he created a law that made it so that he could not even attend peace talks with Russia. So how he's going to break his own law? He has no problems breaking laws in Ukraine. We know this. So here's what he said to last week at the NATO summit, saying, I set a goal that in November we'd have a fully ready plan. I think that representatives of Russia should be at the second summit. So that is major progress, recognizing that Russia needs to be a part of a deal with Russia. He's a little slow. He says, it's time for that. Now, Matthew Miller, the State Department spokesperson, said, we've always supported diplomacy when Ukraine is ready. Bullshit. And it's never been clear that the Kremlin is ready for diplomacy. That's a lie.
That's a total
right
lie.
There.
Bald-faced lie.
Bald-faced lie. Yeah, you want to expand on that?
Well, I mean, look, from the very beginning, even before this happened, even before in December, we know that this was the case, that there was peace agreements on the table ready to be employed, and sort of pleading with them, like, go forward with this peace agreement. Then, of course, we know about in Turkey, right? In Ankara, there was peace negotiations happening until
the West sabotaged.
Until the West, specifically Boris Johnson, flew in with his floppy hair and sabotaged the peace agreements, where Zelensky had basically signed the agreement. Mm-hmm. And by the way, they would have had more land. They would have kept huge swaths of land as part of the agreement.
Yes.
But they didn't, and the West scuttled that agreement.
All right, we're going to look at the land in just a second. But now at least Russian spokesman Dmitry Peskov agreed, yes, Russia should be there, but we're not falling for any more of your non-peace plans like the Switzerland was. According to Peskov, he says, by no means a peace summit is what Zelensky has been hosting. So it's probably necessary to first understand what he means. So you don't want to just keep having meetings if the guy's showing up with no plan at all, which is no peace plan. Now, what he means by this is that Zelensky's peace plans have been non-starters. And it's the same. He's been repeating this for the last 18 months. And we've been over this many times, but we'll do it again because the mainstream media does not understand the land conflict that is in eastern Ukraine. They never show these maps, but we do. What Zelensky's plan is that Ukraine will join NATO and have NATO weapons and NATO soldiers, and Russia will give back Crimea and the Donbass, the area that it is currently defending. So let's look at that. If you take a look at this map, what you see in the red here is the area that was Ukraine when the conflict started in early 2022 and is now a part of Russia. The areas there that are shaded in red have voted to become Russia. They have Russian IDs, Russian passports, they're Russian speakers. Those mayors asked Russia to come in and protect them from repeated attacks by Ukraine, which started in 2014. Now, the gray area between the light area that's Ukraine and the red area that's now Russia, the gray area is still the area that's under contention. And in fact, the people who live in those regions, majority want to join Russia, and Russia has said that is the territory they are going to stop at.
But not only wanted to become part of Russia, voted overwhelmingly as part of the referendum to become part of Russia when they were put to a vote. I think the vote was over 93 or 94%.
The lowest percentage was only in one region of the Donbass, was in the high 80s, 86%, I believe it was. The other regions were all in the 90% that wanted to become a part of Russia because they are ethnic Russians and they speak Russian, and their schools are in Russian, and they've been tortured by the SBU since 2014.
And the Biden administration, under the leadership of Jake Sullivan at the State Department and others, have said that, that election was a total fake election, and you can't trust those election results. That's really rich.
Yeah, that's easy for them to say.
It's really rich coming from the Biden administration.
Ukraine cannot retake. Can we put the map back up just because I didn't get to my point? I apologize. Ukraine cannot take back that red area. They don't have the manpower, they don't have the wherewithal, and they don't have the money. But even if they could, even if by some miracle Russia agreed to withdraw from those areas, Ukraine has given no assurances that the people who were tortured there for the last decade will be safe. They have never said that. And, despite us listening for it. So again, also Zelensky's plan is to retake Crimea, which is the island at the bottom that you see there. That became part of Russia in 2014, also by an overwhelming vote, because again, Ukraine was attacking their own people. Now, when Russia proposed keeping the borders as is and a ceasefire, Ukraine has just ignored that and said, nope, we're taking that back, even though there's no real logistical way they can do that. But they also Russia wants Ukraine to end all NATO negotiations, especially because last week NATO declared unequivocally that all NATO members are now nuclear members. This was the declaration from the NATO summit last week in Washington, D.C., saying as long as nuclear weapons exist, NATO will remain a nuclear alliance. Again, Russia doesn't want nukes on its borders any more than the United States wants nukes on its borders. Nobody should want nukes anywhere near their family. Raise your hand if you agree. So now this is a matter of timing, whether Russia goes to the event, which they have always said they would if it's a serious proposal. But a question now is, what U.S. representatives would go to this peace talk? Who would be interested in it? President Biden, I would say the wind is out of his sails for supporting Ukraine. He says it at NATO summits. He says it, Senate meetings and such like that. He definitely opens the checkbook, but it is not a hot campaign topic for him. You can see that when he says that, it gives him no political favors, no polling points. But would he even go? Or if by November, when this summit happens, we have a president-elect Donald Trump, then would anyone from the Trump campaign go? Well, not if the new VP candidate J.D. Vance has anything to say about it. In December of 2023, he told Steve Bannon that people in Washington want to cut Social Security benefits to give money to Ukraine so Zelensky's ministers can buy yachts, and he's offended by it. Watch.
You have a foreign leader coming to the United States like we're some sort of geopolitical Salvation Army. That is not the role of the United States here, is to hand out money to every beggar who comes into our country and demands that we fund their foreign conflict. So Zelensky is parachuting into this domestic political debate about prioritizing our own border. He's not here to tell us anything we haven't heard before. He's here to badger and browbeat Speaker Johnson and Senate Republicans into foregoing our negotiations on border security in order to write him another blank check. I've never seen anything like this. This is not Churchill coming in the midst of World War II. This is literally a guy begging for a handout and telling Republicans to stop negotiating over your own border security. I'm offended by it. As a United States Senator, I'm offended by it. We should be focused on our own border and be having that debate. We don't need Zelensky to parachute and tell us how to run our country. You have people in this town saying we need to cut Social Security. There are people who would cut Social Security, throw our grandparents into poverty. Why? So that one of Zelensky's ministers can buy a bigger yacht? Kiss my ass, Steve. It's not happening.
Okay. Clyde in our chat says he's got that one right. I agree. Now, he said some things about creating a new war with Iran that I'm not thrilled about, but at least on this one, we are right here. JD Vance.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people say in the chat, you guys should do a deep dive on JD Vance. We certainly have, and we mentioned quite a bit of it yesterday on the show. And there's a lot of things that I don't agree with him on, but we talked about that yesterday. So we've definitely done.
We did, yes, yeah. But at least we have someone now who is a leader of a party saying no more for Ukraine, no more supporting them when we have priorities. I'm with you.
And I'm with
you on that. I'm glad to hear that.
I like what Tucker said about that yesterday, which is look at the people, when you look at JD Vance, regardless of maybe how you feel about him, look at all the people who came out in opposition to him. People like Lindsey Graham and others, warmongers, war pigs, who absolutely want us to continue in Ukraine and sending money into Israel and other spots. And JD Vance, I'm not keen on his position on Israel right now. We don't fully know where he stands on sending more money and weapons to Israel, but certainly on the Ukraine part of it, at least he is absolutely against it. So
yes.
That absolutely rubs those individuals the wrong way, to Tucker's point. But again, We'll have to see. Proof is in the pudding.
But if there is a Trump party in power, or at least a president-elect in power, and they say, we're not going to go to your peace summit, Ukraine, you got to put on your big boy pants and work this out on your own. That does what we have said all along, gives Russia the bargaining chip to end the war in the way that they want it to. And that's what every pundit we've had on this show has said all along. So it's just putting Ukraine in a worse and worse and worse position. Zelensky doesn't care. He's a demon, but the people who have to die between now and then is the real tragedy. Go ahead, Philip.
And I know that we tend to get confused in the U.S. that we're not actually part of every conflict on Earth. We don't need to be there for the peace negotiations. There are two countries that are in conflict with each other can negotiate it out by themselves without us involved.
Yeah,
it's
they're
quite
adults.
Possible.
It is quite possible.